Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. In today's video, we're finally going to do the timing belt on the Acty. I'm pretty excited for this because this is pretty much like the biggest thing that I have to do before I can start daily driving the van again. A couple things I want to note before we get super far into this. The first one has to do with the working area. We're primarily going to be working in the wheel well here, and the reason that's important is that it's a tight space and lighting may not always be the best. I'm just going to ask that you guys be a little bit patient with me. I'll definitely do my best to get the best shots I can. The second thing I want to touch on is the fact that I'm not a professional by any means. I'm just a guy who likes cars. I've done a few timing belts on other cars, but never on an Acty. So if you have any like tips or tricks to do this, I would. All right. I don't know how well that picked up on camera, but that was actually someone doing a burnout, which is kind of weird because that's really not the norm in this neighborhood. Things tend to be pretty quiet. Anyways, though, what I'm hoping to do with this video is create a resource so other people who are doing their timing belts have something to help guide them. If you have lots of knowledge and tips and tricks when you're doing the timing belt on the Acty, please leave them in the comments down below just so we can help other people. The last thing I want to mention is definitely get this manual. This has been the biggest help ever. There's so much good information on this, from torque specs to part numbers, and so yeah, definitely buy this. I'll make sure to link this down in the description below. Now onto the stuff that we're gonna need. Pretty much we're gonna have to jack up the car or van. I keep saying car, but it's a van. So a jack, we got some jack stands. I already got the wheel chokes on the front there. We're also gonna need a assortment of different sockets and whatnot. So I know we'll need the 10, 12, 15, and 17. Some of the bolts in there are probably gonna be rusted, or if someone else has done the job and they use Loctite, the bolts will be on there very tight. So I would highly recommend having an assortment of breaker bars. Now onto the parts that you'll need. Obviously, timing belt, you'll need your water pump, the tensioner and idler bearing, I don't know which one's which, valve cover gasket, and thermostat. I bought a lot of these parts from Right Drive Parts. I'll actually link to them down in the description below. For the record, I have no affiliation with them. It's just who I bought them from. The one thing I didn't get from them was actually the spring for the tensioner. The timing belt kit that I got didn't come with one. So if you're looking for one, right here is the part number. I ended up buying this secondhand from Mile High K, who's another automotive YouTuber who specializes in K cars. But if you're looking for one, JP Parts, they can actually source this, and it's really cheap. The spring itself is like $3 to $4, but the shipping is where they get you. So realistically, you're gonna pay like 25 to 30 bucks, just depending on shipping. I'd also recommend having some Loctite, some RTV gasket maker. You'll need some coolant, although you'll notice that I actually have some water. The reason I have water instead of coolant is that I'm actually going to start off by filling up the coolant system with water, and then I'm going to drain it. I'm going to do that a few times just to help get the debris out of there, because I suspect the coolant system in this car has been neglected. Once I'm satisfied with how clean the fluid is, then at that point I'll go in and put coolant. And if you're curious what coolant to use, I looked it up and everyone was recommending to use the Honda specific coolant. Lastly, you'll definitely need a adjustable funnel, because the place where you fill up the coolant is actually in a pretty odd place. First thing we're going to start off with is actually just removing the valve cover. My van's already partially stripped, so I'm just going to remove the carpets. If you have a van with the full interior, remove the carpets. I just don't know that process. The next part will actually be removing the little bolts. There's 4 of them. And then there's a little indent on the side, so you can lift it on up. Before we go any further and remove the valve cover, here's a quick reminder to disconnect your battery. To take off the valve cover, what I'm gonna end up doing is taking off these 2 bolts, removing the spark plug wires. Also, there's this little tubing that looks like it goes back to the recirculation, so some of the crankcase pressure gets put back into the intake here. I'm not sure yet, but I actually think I might end up removing the throttle cable, because it's only a bolt here that I would loosen up. But the reason that'd be nice is that it would actually give me more room to pull the valve cover off. I'm also going to take out the spark plugs, mainly because I'm going to have to turn the engine over, and then having the plugs out means there won't be any compression, and that's just going to make my life a lot easier. So something that, takes, a minute or 2 goes a long way. here's a better look at the valve cover. 2 top bolts right there, and these top ones are longer, and then there's 2 bolts on the bottom. The bottom ones are actually shorter, but the big thing is the one that's closer to the passenger side had a ground attached to it, so that's just going to be super important to make sure I put that back. It's a rubber grommet, which I like because they're easier to clean up. Yeah, nothing crazy. I'll clean this up off camera, mainly because, I mean, this is a pretty straightforward thing. You know, gonna hit it with some cleaner, wipe it off, let it dry, so by the time we reassemble everything, it will be good to go. If you want to paint it, definitely right now is a good time to paint it. I don't really care about that though. I just want this van to run. Well, the next thing we're gonna do is actually jack the van up now. Where I like to jack it up from is this rear bar right here, and I'll also put some jack stands there. Of course though, I want to reiterate again that you definitely want to have wheel chokes on the front so the van doesn't go sliding off. Also, I do want to minimize the chance of like dirt and debris getting into the valve train, so I'm gonna make sure to close all the doors on the van. I'll put the lid back on. I think it should be okay with that. Something I like to do is obviously have the van on the jack stands, but just as a precaution, I also like having the jack right under there. It's not like taking any weight of the car, or let me adjust this actually. There you go. It's not really taking any weight of the van, but just as a precaution in case one of the jack stands fail, the jack will be there to hopefully help catch it. If you don't have an impact gun like this, what you can do is put the e-brake on, and that should hold it pretty well, assuming your e-brake works. If it doesn't, just break the lug nuts loose before you lift up the van. I know it may be hard to see, but right there next to the oil filter, there is a little bolt right there. And that bolt is designed so you undo the bolt and then coolant comes out. So that way we can drain the coolant out of the engine block. And then right next to it, right here is actually the thermostat. So there's 1, 2, and then there's a 3rd bolt over here on this side. So we're also gonna undo these bolts to get the thermostat out. I do wanna note with these, I have heard of people having issues taking them out. So the biggest piece of advice I could give you is to remember that you need to back them out nice slowly, but the biggest thing is back them out evenly. If you want that flow to go quicker, you can take off the radiator cap. I went ahead and already snugged down that other bolt back because it's pretty simple just to screw it back in. Next, we're gonna undo the thermostat. And so yeah, just those 3 bolts and we'll get it. I'm just breaking them loose to start. All right, and then I'll slowly back them out at the same time. Again, I've heard from other people they had issues with bolts breaking when they untorque them unevenly. Oh yeah, it's already starting to come out. This is why I always wear glasses. We're gonna break it loose and it's all gonna come flying out. Ooh. Man. Ooh. Turning this over because we got some coolant that should be coming out of the radiator. Oh yeah, right there. Before putting the new thermostat back in, you definitely want to make sure to clean it. The van uses an O-ring, so there's not really a lot to clean in comparison to like if you're using a silicone gasket. Now that we're going to put everything back together, probably the biggest thing with the thermostat is that you want to put this little piece here. This is essentially like a bleeder valve. But anyways, you want to put this at the very top because when you're bleeding the car, this is going to allow air bubbles to escape out. Just as an example, the engine in the van is slanted like this. So that means you would end up having this look something like that when it's going in. Before we start taking off the covers for the timing belt and stuff, we will have to take off this little thing. So this is actually the dipstick for the engine oil. Now we don't have to completely take it off. We have these 2 bolts here, so we'll loosen them up and then actually just turn the dipstick over. Of course, we will have a little oil pan there to catch some of the oil that comes out. You do have the option of actually just draining out all the oil, but I recently did the oil change, so for me it'll be easier to catch the oil that came out and then just refill it with some new oil. Now we are to the point where we can actually like start getting to the timing belt itself. We already got this loose because we'll be having to move this around. We'll start with this cover. So it's a few screws. I believe it's only 3. Oh, I guess it's 4 screws. From there, we'll have access to start taking off these. And there's just random bolts. In addition to that, you have little clips like that. Once we got all these done, we'll take off this engine mount, which we'll actually need to use a jack. The owner's manual says that you can just use a jack and jack it up by the oil pan. Just to be safe, I like to use a piece of wood that helps disperse the load. But yeah, after that engine mount, it should be pretty close, and then just take off this bottom cover. Quick thing though, this is one of those times where it probably will be helpful to have that breaker bar, because I know the first time I took off this engine mount here, that was a huge pain. Well, everyone, it's actually the next day. I ended up walking away just because I got very frustrated, and I know when I'm frustrated, I don't work well. Now, I'll show you what irritated me. If you look right here, you're actually gonna see a bolt that is rusted and obviously a little bit deformed because of that. If you look right above there, right here, you're gonna see a bolt that was rusted and everything, but now it had the head chopped off. I will be honest with you guys, this is not my proudest work, but I mean, it's what I did, so I might as well be transparent. And if anything, anyone who's watching this, just know if you get mad, walk away. But what ended up happening was I tried using a extractor socket, that didn't work. I tried hammering a socket in, that didn't work. I was then gonna drill it out. Halfway through drilling it out, or I guess not even halfway through, I started drilling it out. My drill decided it didn't want to work anymore. So I got very angry and I just said screw it, and I got the Dremel and I chopped the head off so I could get the cover off. Now doing that did cause some damage, but I didn't really care because as you can see here, it looks like a belt was hitting it and rubbing through. So I'm like, it's already messed up, but the other thing is it's actually cracked. For example, if you noticed, actually, I did not cut that second bolt. The reason for it is pretty simple. This area was already cracked. So prior to me doing the timing belt, when someone else serviced it, they cracked that. And then right here is the damage I did getting it out. So it's not the prettiest, but at least for the most part, the timing belt itself will be like covered and safe. Now that we got this out of the way, we're gonna get on to how do you remove the bolt for the crankshaft. The way I did it was I used this, but it didn't actually work initially. The battery on my electric impact gun was low, so when I tried taking it off, it didn't work. But I charged it up and put it in, and then it just came off on its own. There you go. And it's stuck. There is a special tool that you could use to get this off. So essentially it goes over and then you put the 4 bolts back in, and that will allow you to hold the crankshaft in place as you take off the crankshaft bolt. But honestly, I think the easiest method is get a decent impact gun. I got this one as a birthday gift, but honestly, they're not super expensive. And this is one of the cheaper ones. So if you're looking for a cheap one, definitely go with this. As we pull off the pulley, be careful because there is a little key there that helps everything stay in place. It's super easy to lose this, so just be very, very careful. I will be super honest, I'm a little bit confused because there's no markings. Well, I did mess up a little bit because I didn't set all the markings up before I took off this bolt, but what I did instead was I just spun it over here at the crankshaft. Right here is actually the lining mark, so there's an arrow that you're gonna see right there. I actually didn't see it initially because it was dirty, but I cleaned everything off right there. You can see a little arrow. You want those lined up before you take off the pulley though. If you want to line everything up to make it easier on yourself. I didn't know this, but I just looked in the manual, and so right here is the pulley. There's actually a little indent right there, and then right here is the mark that says it's at top dead center, so that lets you know. But getting back to this over here, you want to line up those, and then over there you're going to want the up at the top, and then there's 2 more markings, and I'll show you those real quick in the manual. The reason I say that is that it's really really hard to see it. So for the camshaft, you want the up at the very top, and then there's these two little markings. You want those lined up with the head. To make my life easier, I'm actually gonna mark those with a Sharpie. That way they stand out a little bit more and it makes it easy, but I still have to do the water pump, the bearing here, and then the tensioner. But before I take that all apart, I want this roughly where it should be. My biggest concern, and something that I'm just very cautious of more than anything, is that I don't want these things super out of line, because the engine is an interference engine and I do not want the valves bending. So it's just about being cautious more than anything. I am definitely glad I decided to change the belt, because as you can see under there, it's actually cracking. So definitely on the older side, and it was time to change it. It's always a good thing just to put the old part and new part side by side, just to make sure they're gonna fit, because on the van I noticed is that they have little indentations to help guide it and make sure that this is in like the right position. Putting them side by side, everything seems to match up perfectly fine. Yeah, that's a pretty drastic difference though. Here's actually the pamphlet that came with the new water pump, which I thought was pretty cool. But the bigger thing is this. They have these funny little cartoons. I don't know what they mean, but that makes me laugh. If anyone knows what this means, definitely let me know in the comment section below. Before I put the new water pump in, I just wanted to mention that some of this stuff won't come off by just wiping it off. And if that's the case, you can get like a plastic spatula like this, and you could use it to scrape. The reason I like plastic is because this is less likely to scratch the surface of metal. I didn't show it on camera, but I got everything cleaned up. I mean, it's cleaning stuff. That's pretty self-explanatory. Now, as I start reassembling stuff, the biggest piece of advice I can give is use a Loctite. That way nothing backs out. Hey kitty. For those who have never watched my channel before, that is Stitch. He's actually the neighbor's cat, and he is easily the best cat ever. Hey little guy, he loves attention, always gives us pets, or lets us pet him. He even lets me carry him. Oh, he is such a good cat. I gotta go back to work, Stitch. I'll see you later. He always comes and hangs out with me as I work on the cars. Another thing I'll say is that the torque wrench I have is actually massive. It's a big one, so it's not really gonna work for what I'm doing in terms of torquing down the water pump here, because the bolts are super tiny. So what I'm gonna do instead is I'm gonna use a smaller socket. That way I can still tighten it down, but I'm not really worried about over tightening it, and I'll kind of just eyeball it, if that makes sense. Well, now we are on to the last point, and that's just putting the timing belt on. As always, I like to compare the old part and new part right before putting it on. Ideally, you know, you would compare the parts before taking everything apart, but given the circumstance, I can't really do that here. They look like they're pretty much the same. They're identical lengths, which is good. And I'm not very familiar with this brand, but a lot of people on the Acty forum groups said that it's a very, very good brand, so I'm happy about that. I'm used to Toyotas, so I don't really know other brands outside of that. When it comes to putting the timing belt on, obviously we want the marks to line up, and this mark is almost there, very close. Same thing with that. So when I'm putting the timing belt on, the way I'll do it is I'll have this mark lined up. I'm then going to wrap the belt around here. I'm going to bring it over the idler bearing, come around the water pump, come around the camshaft, and then from there I'm going to have it come under the tensioner and wrap back around. All right, this will be a little bit of trial and error. I mean, even though I have them lined up, I wouldn't be surprised if I do this and then I'm a tooth off, but that's why you triple check everything, especially on a interference engine. And take your time. This can be a frustrating process. If you find yourself getting mad, walk away and come back to it. The nice thing about this setup though is that it's super simple. It's not like we're dealing with a dual overhead cam engine or some other really crazy obscure setup. Well guys, I just wanted to show you what I was talking about and that it can take a couple of tries. So this is my first attempt here, and it's actually really close. So those cam marks are lined up perfectly, but these ones right here, it's like off by like half a tooth. So I'm gonna have to take it off, do some minor finagling, and I'll probably get it after a few tries. I got everything lined up. It did take me a little bit just trying to figure out the exact trick. So what helped me the most is to get all the slack that I potentially could out of here. I feel fairly confident that the timing is all lined up, but just to be safe, what I'm going to do is put the valve cover back on, and then I'm going to turn the car over and then see if she runs. I'm pretty much just going to start it and let it run for a good, 15-30 seconds. The goal is just to make sure that it does run and everything's good. I am actually very, very anxious for this, so we will see. Neutral. Pump. Oh, she starts. She starts. Oh my god. Oh my god. Holy shit. That's such a relief, guys. I'm actually gonna turn it off now. No, she runs. Holy shit. That's a good feeling. Well, everyone, do not make the same mistake that I did. So everything went really good for the test startup, besides one little thing. On the valve cover, look what's over here. I totally spaced putting these two bolts in on the back side. And why is that important? Well, I noticed something dripping under there. That is oil coming from the valve cover that just got all over the exhaust because I didn't tighten it well. I'll tell you what though, that is a really minor thing. All I'll have to do is get some kitty litter, clean that up, not a big deal. But yeah, I'm gonna take the valve cover back off and we'll start the process of putting the timing belt covers on. I messed up pretty bad. I accidentally threw away the valve cover gasket that was new. The reason that's important is that I already threw away the old valve cover gasket. So I have the valve covers, but no gasket. I can't run the car or van without it because then I'm just gonna spill oil everywhere. This sucks. Luckily, it's not too big of a deal, but I mean, guess I'll just have to get another valve cover gasket. So essentially what that means is that we can't finish up the timing belt today, which sucks. But on a positive note, I feel like I can at least talk you guys through the last little bit. So pretty much the big things that are left are to put the belts back on. I'm actually not going to do that today because I don't want to do double the work because these accessory belts are actually very bad. They're super worn and cracked. Anyways, if you're looking to tighten up the belt for the compressor, what you're going to need to do is loosen this one up, and then on this side of the bracket, it's hard to see, but there is a nut. So that nut, you use that to adjust the tension, and then you tighten this up to lock it in place. Right here's the alternator. So you have this bolt that you'll loosen up to allow it to swing up and down. Once you got the tension exactly where you want it, you'll just lock it in place right there. Once you put the belts on, you would come over here, grab these covers, you would put them back on. You would then put the side engine mount. You would need to remember to bolt the oil dipstick back in place. Well, we're pretty much at the home stretch, so we're gonna put the valve cover on. Even though I don't have the gasket, I still want to have it on there so that I can help minimize the chance of something getting into the valve train. Earlier in the video, I did mention you want to have some gasket maker, and the reason you want to do that is right there in the corner. I hope that shows up pretty okay on camera. But anyways, here in these corners, oil tends to seep at the valve covers, and it's not like a Honda Acty thing. It's pretty much every car that I've ever seen. So to help prevent that, you get a little bit of gasket maker, you put just a small dab right there, and then you let it dry and you're good to go. Just be conscientious of what gasket maker you use, because this one takes 24 hours to dry. Other ones are quick dry, so you can have it ready to go in an hour. All right, just as a little reminder for these back bolts on the valve cover, the one that's closest to the wheel well on the passenger side, there is a ground that you want to make sure you put back in, because if you don't have your grounds, that can cause a fire. Now the very last part of this whole process would be filling up the cooling system with coolant and then bleeding the coolant system. I know a lot of people have issues with bleeding it, or at least filling up the filler neck, because this is in the way. I can't really speak for everyone, but this is actually broken on my van, so I don't have to worry about that. We're here on the passenger side wheel well, so normally it would look like this. You come over here, you take off the cap, undo this little bolt, you take this off, And then you'll take off the radiator cap. Of course, make sure it's cool, because if the van or truck is hot, that's not a good time. When you fill the system up with coolant, you're gonna want some type of like adjustable funnel, because this is honestly at a really weird angle and it's a little bit odd. So if you tried it without the funnel, you will definitely spill fluid everywhere. Once you got that filled up with fluid, turn on the vehicle. Make sure you leave that cap off. Then we'll come over to the engine, and then if you look right there, and then right over here, there's two bleeder valves. That's to help bleed out the air from the coolant system. So you'll want to crack those open. There is two more right above the spare tire. I'll tell you right now, the shot that I'd be able to get is bad, so I'll go over to the owner's manual. Here's a shot in the owner's manual. So you can see right there's the spare tire. You'll have to remove that, and then there is two bleeder bolts right there. Also, if you have an automatic, you'll have an additional one over by the engine right above the starter. Also, as you're bleeding the system, you're gonna want to turn the AC all the way up, or not the AC, the heater all the way up, and that way the fluid that's in the heater core can also get circulated through. Well, everyone, that's how you change the timing belt on a Honda Acty. I do apologize. I mean, the last little bit I really wasn't able to show you guys. I just talked about it, but I still hope that was very helpful. Again, if you have any good tips that can help other people, leave that down in the comments below, or if you have any questions, leave that down below. Hopefully we can create a good resource to help others in the future. And with that being said, I'll see you guys in the next video.